Welcome to BeFM Drama. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and today we're bringing you the final part in our 5-part adaptation of The Man with the Twisted Lip, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Holmes has been puzzling over the mysterious disappearance of a man named Neville St. Clair, last seen in the open window of a filthy opium den in London. St. Clair disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a pile of his clothes and a well-known local beggar named Hugh Boone, who claimed never to have seen the missing man. Holmes had feared the worst until the surprise discovery of a new letter from St. Clair posted to his wife after his disappearance. After a night of contemplation, Holmes seems to have found a solution to the case and has brought his friend, Dr. Watson, to the jail cell where Hugh Boone is being held as a suspect in the case. Inspector Bradstreet led us down a passage, opened a barred door, passed down a winding stair, and brought us to a whitewashed corridor with a line of doors on each side.
The third on the right is his. Here it is.
He quietly shot back a panel in the upper part of the door and glanced through.
He is asleep. You can see him very well.
We both put our eyes to the grating. The prisoner lay with his face towards us in a very deep sleep, breathing slowly and heavily. He was a middle-sized man, coarsely clad as befitted his calling. He was, as the inspector had said, extremely dirty, but the grime which covered his face could not conceal its repulsive ugliness. A broad wheal from an old scar ran right across it from eye to chin, and by its contraction had turned up one side of his upper lip, so that 3 teeth were exposed in a perpetual snarl. A shock of very bright red hair grew low over his eyes and forehead.
He's a beauty, isn't he?
He certainly needs a wash. I had an idea that he might, and I took the liberty of bringing the tools with me.
He opened the Gladstone bag as he spoke and took out, to my astonishment, a very large bath sponge.
You're a funny one.
Now, if you will have the great goodness to open the door very quietly, we will soon make him cut a much more respectable figure.
Well, I don't see why not. He doesn't look a credit to the Bow Street cells, does he?
He slipped his key into the lock, and we all very quietly entered the cell. The sleeper half turned and then settled down once more into a deep slumber. Holmes stooped to the water jug, moistened his sponge, and then rubbed it twice vigorously across and down the prisoner's face.
Let me introduce you to Mr. Neville St. Clair of Lee in the county of Kent.
Never in my life had I seen such a sight. The man's face peeled off under the sponge like the bark from a tree. Gone was the coarse brown tint. Gone, too, was the horrid scar which had seamed it across, and the twisted lip which had given the repulsive sneer to the face. A twitch brought away the tangled red hair, and there, sitting up in his bed, was a pale, sad-faced, refined-looking man, black-haired and smooth-skinned, rubbing his eyes and staring about him with sleepy bewilderment. Then, suddenly realizing his exposure, he broke into a scream and threw himself down with his face to the pillow.
Great heavens! It is, indeed, the missing man. I know him from the photograph.
The prisoner turned with the reckless air of a man who abandons himself to his destiny.
Be it so. And, please tell me, what am I charged with? If I am Mr. Neville St. Clair, then it is obvious that no crime has been committed and that, therefore, I am illegally detained.
No crime, but a very great error has been committed. You would have done better to have trusted your wife.
It was not the wife. It was the children. God, help me. I would not have them ashamed of their father. My God, what an exposure. What can I do?
If you leave it to a court of law to clear the matter up, of course you can hardly avoid publicity. On the other hand, if you convince the police authorities that there is no possible case against you, I do not know that there is any reason that the details should find their way into the papers. Inspector Bradstreet would, I am sure, make notes upon anything which you might tell us and submit it to the proper authorities. The case would then never go into court at all.
God bless you. I would have endured imprisonment, even execution, rather than have left my a miserable secret as a family blot to my children. You're the first who have ever heard my story.
So pray tell it.
And so, Neville St. Clair told it. His father was a schoolmaster in Chesterfield, where he received an excellent education. He traveled in his youth, took to the stage, and finally became a reporter on an evening paper in London. One day his editor wished to have a series of articles upon begging in the metropolis, and he volunteered to supply them. It was only by trying begging himself, by really experiencing it, that he could get the facts upon which to base his articles. When he was an actor, St. Clair had, of course, learned all the secrets of makeup and had been famous in the green room for his skill. He painted his face, and to make himself as pitiable as possible, he made a good scar and fixed one side of his lip into a twist by the aid of a small slip of flesh-colored sticking plaster. Then, with a red head of hair and appropriate clothes, he took his position in the business part of the city, ostensibly as a match seller, but really as a beggar. For 7 hours he plied his trade. When he returned home in the evening, he found to his surprise that he had received no less than £1 6 shillings. Neville St. Clair wrote his articles and thought little more of the matter until, sometime later, he backed a bill for a friend and had a writ served upon him for £25. He was at his wit's end where to get the money, but a sudden idea came to him. He begged a fortnight's grace from the creditor, asked for a holiday from his employers, and spent that time begging in the city under his disguise. In 10 days he had the money and had paid the debt. You can imagine how hard it was for him to settle back down to arduous work at £2 a week when he knew that he could earn as much in a day by smearing his face with a little paint, laying his cap on the ground, and sitting still. It was a long fight between his pride and the money, but the money won at last, and he threw away reporting and sat day after day in the corner he had first chosen, inspiring pity by his ghastly face and filling his pockets with coppers. Only one man knew his secret. He was the keeper of the opium den, which St. Clair used as his base in Swandam Lane, where he could every morning emerge as a squalid beggar and in the evenings transform himself back into a well-dressed man about town. The manager was paid well for his rooms, and St. Clair knew his secret was safe with him. Soon, St. Clair found that he was saving considerable sums of money. As he grew richer, he grew more ambitious, took a house in the country, and eventually married, without anyone having a suspicion as to his real occupation. His wife knew only that he had business in the city. That previous Monday he had finished for the day and was dressing in his rooms above the opium den when he looked out of his window and saw, to his horror and astonishment, that his wife was standing in the street, with her eyes fixed full upon him. He gave a cry of surprise, threw up his arms to cover his face, and, rushing to the manager, begged him to prevent anyone from coming up to his room. He heard his wife's voice downstairs. Swiftly he threw off his clothes, pulled on those of the beggar, and put on his makeup and wig. Even his wife's eyes could not pierce so complete a disguise. But then it occurred to him that there might be a search in his room, and that the clothes might betray him. He threw open the window, reopening by his violence a small cut which he had inflicted upon himself in the bedroom that morning. Then he seized his coat, which was weighted by the coppers which he had just transferred to it from the leather bag in which he carried his takings. He hurled it out of the window, and it disappeared into the river. The other clothes would have followed, but at that moment there was a rush of constables up the stair, and a few minutes after he found, rather to his relief, that instead of being identified as Mr. Neville St. Clair, he was arrested as his murderer.
I do not know that there is anything else for me to explain. I was determined to preserve my disguise as long as possible, and hence my preference for a dirty face. And knowing that my wife would be terribly anxious, I slipped off my ring and confided it to the manager at a moment when no constable was watching me, together with a hurried scrawl telling her that she had no cause to fear.
That note only reached her yesterday.
Good God, what a week she must have spent.
I've no doubt of it. But have you never been prosecuted for begging?
Many times. But what was a fine to me? It must stop here, however. If the police are to hush this thing up, there must be no more of Hugh Boone. I've sworn it by the most solemn oaths which a man can take. In that case, I think that it is probable that no further steps may be taken. But if you are found again, then all must come out. I am sure, Mr. Holmes, that we are very much indebted to you for having cleared the matter up. I wish I knew how you reach your results.
I reached this one by sitting upon 5 pillows and consuming an ounce of shag. I think, Watson, that if we drive to Baker Street, we shall be just in time for breakfast.
Hugh Boone and Neville St. Clair have been revealed as one and the same man. For years, the wealthy and respectable Neville St. Clair had built his fortune entirely on his extraordinary success as a beggar in the streets of the financial districts of London. With the revelation of the truth, St. Clair swears to give up his life as Hugh Boone and to return to his wife, leaving Holmes quite satisfied by the extraordinary results of his investigation.